They thought their gated paradise was untouchable. But when I inherited 1,000 acres that legally held their streets, sidewalks, and even their front lawns, their little HOA fantasy collapsed overnight. If you've ever dealt with entitled HOA boards or bullies in suits, subscribe now, because this story exposes what happens when the wrong guy gets the deed. I was standing in the Arizona heat, staring at a weathered envelope. It had my grandfather's name printed in cursive, postmarked just a week before he died. He and I hadn't spoken in years, but inside that envelope was a deed, not to a cabin or a car, but to an entire 1,000-acre plot of land. I almost laughed until I pulled up the coordinates. The land surrounded a posh suburban development called Clearwood Lakes. Their neat little homes, walking trails, and even the clubhouse sat right in the middle of my newly inherited property. The next morning, I drove down to see it myself. The HOA security gate blocked the main road. A smug-looking rent-a-cop in a pastel polo shirt asked for my access code. I told him who I was and showed him the deed. He laughed. "Sir, this is private property." I told him again, slowly this time. "No, you're on my property. Your entire HOA development is built in the middle of it." His face dropped. I backed up my truck and pulled out the county land grid from the recorder's office. The boundary lines were clear. My 1,000 acres swallowed their roads and trails whole. I gave them a week. One letter to the HOA board. It was polite. Formal. I explained the situation. I told them I wouldn't charge anything for continued use of the roads, not yet. I just wanted acknowledgement of ownership and a signed easement agreement for liability. No response. Just silence. Then the flyers started appearing on doors in the neighborhood. One resident sent me a photo. "Outsider threatens our safety, HOA taking action." Action? That evening, I found "No trespassing" signs installed along the road, on my land. They even hired a local attorney and started issuing warnings to residents not to engage with me. It was like a bad sitcom, but I wasn't laughing. So I escalated. I went to the local zoning board and had the records updated. That triggered an automatic audit of the entire Clearwood Lakes HOA infrastructure, utilities, fire lanes, everything. And the fire lane? It passed right through a piece of land I now owned, and the HOA had no permit. On the third day, 2 HOA board members showed up unannounced at my ranch. One of them tried the friendly route. "Let's find a compromise." The other, a woman in her 60s with a permanent scowl, started lecturing me about community standards. I reminded her that trespassing on private land was a felony. Her tone changed. That night, I got an email. "We are prepared to take legal action against your threats." Perfect. I wanted everything in writing. I forwarded it to my attorney. His reply was short. "They have no leg to stand on. You own everything under them except their homes." I told him, "Let's play it slow. I want them to feel it first." By the end of the week, HOA contractors tried to reroute a trail that went along the lakefront, again my land. I had them removed. One of the workers argued until I told him the police were already called, for his safety, not mine. Things were building. Tension was visible now. Residents began whispering. Some even knocked on my gate. "Is it true?" they asked. "Are we really trespassing?" I showed them the public maps. One man cried, "I bought this home thinking it was secure forever." I nodded. "You were lied to." And then came the HOA emergency meeting, the one that would change everything. The HOA's emergency meeting ended in chaos. According to one resident who slipped me a copy of the minutes, the board voted unanimously to challenge ownership of the surrounding land. That would have been funny if it wasn't so serious. Because that same night, someone chain shut the main gate to my ranch, from their side, and posted a giant red sign that read, "Private HOA property, no entry." My own land. My own gate. Locked from the outside. I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't cut the chain. Instead, I sat there in my truck with a thermos of black coffee and waited. At 7:13 a.m., a black Escalade pulled up to the other side. Out stepped none other than HOA President Barbara Kensley, the same woman who threatened legal action in her email. She looked at me through the bars, holding a clipboard like she was interviewing a gardener. I didn't say a word. I let her speak first. She started talking like this was her land. She called me, sir, like it was a curse word. She said she had authorization to restrict access while investigations were pending. I asked one question. Barbara, who owns the land under your feet right now? Her lips tightened. This is an active HOA-controlled development zone. I raised my phone and hit record. So you're trespassing, I said. She froze. The camera was already rolling. I sent that footage to my attorney, the county zoning board, and the sheriff's office. The response was swift. Within 48 hours, I received formal notice confirming I had unrestricted ingress and egress rights, and that any interference would be considered criminal trespass. I had the sheriff escort me to the gate. Barbara watched from her porch, arms folded like a disappointed principal. She didn't say a word as they cut her chain. But it didn't stop there. HOA board members began warning residents not to speak with me. The HOA newsletter claimed I was harassing residents. One neighbor, a war veteran named Phil, came over to apologize. They threatened to fine us if we even waved at you, he said. That was the moment I realized they weren't just arrogant. They were afraid. I decided to make things public. I printed 200 copies of the deed and the zoning maps and hand-delivered them to every mailbox in Clearwood Lakes. No threats. No warnings. Just facts. You are living on land surrounded by private property not governed by your HOA. By the next morning, 3 different residents contacted me quietly. Can you help us get out of this HOA? One asked. We didn't know this land wasn't part of it. Barbara responded with what she thought was a power move. She filed for a temporary injunction to prevent me from disrupting community operations. She claimed the streets were private. What she didn't realize was that those same streets were paved using county funds, under a contract that referenced my grandfather's estate. Her injunction was denied, with prejudice. The pressure cooker was now hissing. Residents were starting to ask real questions. Why weren't we told? Why didn't title disclose this? Why is the HOA hiding this? And in every reply, the board blamed me, the man who had done nothing more than inherit land and tell the truth. But now, truth was a threat. One afternoon, I saw a group of HOA members gathered near my property line with measuring tape and maps. I approached them. One of them, a tall man in a golf hat, tried to block my view of the documents. We're conducting a survey, he muttered. I asked who authorized it. The HOA. I pointed to the stake in the ground. That's 4 feet inside my property line. The surveyor swallowed hard. You need to leave, he said. I didn't move. You're trespassing, I repeated calmly. I had my lawyer on speaker. They left in silence. By now, every inch of HOA arrogance had backfired. Their signs, their chains, their newsletters, all of it documented, time-stamped, and sent to the county. The next board meeting was standing room only. Residents demanded resignations. Barbara walked out midway through. 2 board members followed her. That night, I stood on my porch, watching the HOA president's car drive past, slow, careful, and quiet. For the first time, she looked at me the way she used to look at her neighbors, like the problem was inside the gates now. By now, the HOA was in a full-blown identity crisis. For years they had operated under the illusion that they controlled everything inside their little gated world. Now maps were surfacing, residents were waking up, and I was still standing at the edge of it all, calm, legal, and very much in control. But Barbara wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. That same week, I received a certified letter with a bold red stamp, Notice of Financial Claim. The HOA was attempting to bill me for unauthorized usage of infrastructure, citing things like wear and tear on private roads and unapproved perimeter access. The amount? $7,900. No breakdown. No receipts. Just a threat. They were trying to bankrupt me into compliance. I didn't just ignore it. I responded with a letter of my own, drafted by my lawyer. It included a 14-page appendix listing every time their private roads had been maintained using federal or county funds, contracts that had my family's land easement written into them decades ago. I added aerial drone photos showing HOA landscaping trucks parked illegally on my property line. I ended it with one line. Further action on your part will be considered willful defamation and criminal extortion. They went quiet for 72 hours. Then came the unexpected counterstrike. A local realtor friend forwarded me a screenshot of a new property listing in the HOA's community newsletter. It featured my land, the buffer zone behind their cul-de-sac, advertised as pending community development. They were trying to sell what they didn't own. I didn't call them. I called the county recorder and filed a formal land fraud complaint. The very next day, 2 county officials showed up to meet me on site. We walked the property line together with the original surveyor's records. They documented fresh attempts to mark stakes and divide plots that didn't exist. I showed them everything: the drone footage, the listings, the paper trail. "You've got them dead to rights," one of the officials muttered. I asked him if this could get criminal. He nodded slowly. By the weekend, Clearwood Lakes was buzzing. A whistleblower HOA member leaked internal emails revealing panic within the board. One email from Barbara read, "We need to pressure him to sell. Quietly. Legally if possible." Another, "If he controls that land, our valuation could tank." Residents began pulling out of HOA meetings altogether. That Sunday, I hosted a small barbecue for a few neighboring ranchers. One of them, a quiet man named Jesse, whispered something between bites of brisket. "You know," he said, "if you file for a private utility access review, you could cut them off completely. They're dependent on infrastructure that passes under your western acres." That night, I opened the township's utility schematics. Jesse was absolutely right. The HOA's water lines, fiber conduits, and even drainage systems all snaked through my land. I wasn't interested in cutting anyone off, but I was done being threatened. So I filed for an easement review under State Statute 1203.14, citing abuse and unauthorized access. It forced an emergency review with the planning department. Barbara must have heard about it, because the very next morning she was parked outside my gate again. This time, she brought a local news crew. Cameras rolling, she gave a 2-minute statement about land misuse and reckless outsider behavior. I let her finish, then walked up calmly, handed the reporter a flash drive, and said, "Here's the full legal record." The story never aired. By the end of that week, I wasn't just a landowner. I was the man who held the keys to their infrastructure, their borders, and uncomfortably for them, the truth. They were scrambling for control. But there was only one chapter left before everything collapsed. Barbara made one final push to reclaim her crumbling kingdom. It started with a letter she distributed to the entire HOA community, on official letterhead, stuffed into every mailbox. In it, she claimed I was interfering with community operations, abusing loopholes, and threatening Clearwood Lake's way of life. She encouraged homeowners to report any activity near my land and offered to start a legal fund to defend our values. It was desperation. But it was loud. I didn't respond with anger. I responded with signatures. That same week, I filed 2 formal petitions, one to revoke the HOA's conditional infrastructure access, and another to rezone a narrow corridor of land I now controlled that ran through their northern boundary. The zoning change would designate it as a conservation easement, making it permanently undevelopable and severing the future expansion plan Barbara had lobbied for over a decade. By Friday, a county mediator called and requested a formal meeting between me, the HOA board, and planning officials. I agreed on one condition: it would be on record. We met in the community town hall building. Barbara showed up late, still trying to look composed. Her voice shook as she spoke. "You're deliberately targeting us. she said. "This is harassment." I didn't raise my voice. I simply slid the folder across the table. Inside were 33 documented violations committed by the HOA over a span of 14 years. Misuse of public funds, property misrepresentation, illegal surveillance, even forged easement markers. The county official said it flatly. "This changes everything." The county launched a formal investigation. Homeowners received notices. HOA meetings were suspended indefinitely. Barbara resigned the next day. But the blow that no one saw coming? The HOA's insurance underwriter terminated their coverage. Overnight, Clearwood Lakes became uninsurable and unprotected. That Sunday, I walked my ranch fence line like I had 100 times before. I paused near the western bluff that overlooked the HOA's northern trail entrance. Down below, a faded community sign stood crooked, one side half buried in mud. For the first time in years, no one had trimmed the path or repainted the sign. It felt like nature was reclaiming its space. I stood there quietly when a couple, residents from Clearwood, no doubt, approached the fence. "We just wanted to say," the man began, "that we were wrong. Not all of us supported what they did. You're not the villain they said you were." I thanked him. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. In the months that followed, the HOA disbanded. A local co-op formed in its place, voluntary, transparent, respectful of landowners. I even donated a small plot of my land for a public park, right at the edge of our shared boundary. People asked me why, after everything. My answer was simple: because respect isn't something you force with rules. It's something you earn with truth. And as for Barbara? She left the state. Moved quietly, with no fanfare. But her name still echoes in the neighborhood, now as a cautionary tale. Because in the end, power built on fake authority crumbles the second someone shows up with real ownership, and the receipts to prove it.